October 1937, Manhattan, New York. In a modest apartment in Ridgewood, Queens, Hermann Lang sat at his kitchen table long after midnight. His wife and children slept soundly in the next room. The only sound was the scratch of his pencil across paper. In the dim light of a single lamp, he was copying classified blueprints, line by line, measurement by measurement, detail by detail. The documents spread before him represented America's most closely guarded military secret, the Norden Bombsight, a device so revolutionary, so critical to national defense, that bombardiers would later take an oath to protect it with their lives. A machine the United States Navy believed could change the nature of war itself. Lang worked quickly but methodically. He had memorized the security procedures at the Carl L. Norden Corporation factory on Lafayette Street, where he worked as an assembly inspector. He knew exactly how long he could keep the drawings before they would be missed. He knew which documents were cross-referenced and which existed in isolation. He knew the guard rotation schedules and the vault access logs. He had been planning this theft for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And tonight, finally, he had it. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The pencil moved faster now. Every gyroscope mounting bracket, every gear ratio, every tolerance specification, every electrical connection. Lang was not just copying the drawings. He was committing them to memory as backup, in case something went wrong with the physical copies. His training as a German engineer served him well. He understood what he was looking at. He grasped the significance of each component, each measurement, each design choice. This was not industrial espionage for profit. This was patriotism, or what Lang believed was patriotism. He had immigrated to the United States in 1927 at age 19, a young German engineer seeking opportunity in America. He had worked hard, learned English, pursued naturalization, and built a career at one of the most prestigious defense contractors in the country. But he had never stopped thinking of himself as German first. When the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence agency, approached him through intermediaries, he did not hesitate. Germany needed this technology. Therefore, he would provide it. By 3 in the morning, he had finished. Multiple sheets of technical drawings, copied by hand with remarkable precision, lay before him on the kitchen table. He carefully rolled them and slid them into a wooden casing designed to hold an umbrella. The casing had a false bottom. The blueprints fit perfectly. He replaced the umbrella, and to any casual observer, it looked like an ordinary piece of rain gear. 3 months later, on January 9th, 1938, Lang walked calmly through the crowds at New York Harbor. In his hand, he carried the umbrella. He approached the SS Reliance, a passenger liner bound for Bremen, Germany. Among the passengers and crew, Lang spotted his contact, a German steward who worked on the ship, a secret courier for the Abwehr. They had never met before. They would never meet again. Lang handed off the umbrella as if lending it to a friend. The exchange took less than 10 seconds. No words were spoken beyond pleasantries about the weather. The steward nodded politely and walked away. For this delivery, Lang received $1,500, a substantial sum in 1938, more money than he could earn in 6 months of legitimate work. The umbrella crossed the Atlantic, hidden among the crew's personal effects. 5 days later, it arrived in Bremen. Within a week, the drawings reached Hamburg and the hands of Oberst Nikolaus Ritter, one of the Abwehr's most successful intelligence officers. Ritter had been cultivating assets in America for years, building networks, recruiting agents, stealing secrets. But this was his greatest achievement yet. The Norden Bombsight, the device American military planners believed would revolutionize strategic bombing, the machine that cost more to develop than almost any other single weapons system in America's arsenal. Ritter spread the drawings across his desk and studied them with growing excitement. The gyroscopic stabilization system, the analog computer for calculating bomb trajectories, the autopilot integration that allowed the bombsight to actually fly the aircraft during the critical seconds of the bomb run. It was ingenious, it was sophisticated, it was everything German intelligence had hoped to obtain. But there was a problem. The drawings Lang had copied were incomplete. He had captured perhaps 70% of the full design, enough to understand the principles, enough to see how the major systems worked, but not enough to build a functional copy. Critical details were missing: tolerances for certain components, specifications for the gyroscope bearings, the complete wiring diagram for the electrical systems, manufacturing processes for specialized parts. Ritter made a decision. Lang needed to come to Germany. Not permanently, just for a visit. A vacation, if anyone asked. Long enough to consult with Luftwaffe technical experts and fill in the gaps from memory. The summons went out through encrypted channels. Lang received it in March 1938. He told his employer he was visiting family in Germany for a few weeks. He told his wife the same story. In April, he boarded a ship bound for Hamburg. What he did not know, what he could not know, was that British intelligence had been monitoring suspicious postal traffic between New York and Germany. They had flagged unusual patterns. They had shared their concerns with the FBI. Lang's name was not yet on any list, but he was being noticed. The net was beginning to tighten, slowly, invisibly. In Hamburg, Luftwaffe engineers waited in a secure facility at the Zeiss optical works. They had studied Lang's drawings intensively for weeks. They had built a partial mock-up based on the incomplete plans. Now they needed the missing pieces. Lang arrived on a grey afternoon in late April. The meeting was held in a conference room with armed guards outside the door. Inside, technical experts from Carl Zeiss Jena, Germany's premier optical firm, waited alongside Luftwaffe bombardment specialists. For 3 intensive days, Lang worked with them. He sketched from memory. He explained manufacturing techniques he had observed at the Norden factory. He described the testing procedures, the calibration process, the maintenance requirements. He answered hundreds of technical questions. The German engineers took copious notes. They photographed every sketch Lang produced. They recorded his verbal explanations on primitive wire recorders. This was too important to write. Trust to written notes alone. On the 4th day, Lang was escorted to the Reich Air Ministry building in Berlin. Hermann Göring himself, Reich Marshal and commander of the Luftwaffe, wanted to meet the spy who had delivered such a treasure. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. Göring thanked Lang personally for his service to the fatherland. He presented him with 10,000 Reichsmarks, a fortune in German currency, far more than the $1,500 Lang had received for the initial theft. Göring assured him that Germany would never forget his patriotism. Lang returned to New York in May 1938, satisfied that he had served his country well. He resumed his job at the Norden factory. He continued his normal life. He believed his mission was complete. He was wrong. Back in Germany, the real work was just beginning. The Luftwaffe's technical directorate established a special project team. Their mandate was clear: evaluate the Norden Bombsight, determine if Germany should adopt the design, and if so, put it into production as quickly as possible. The team was led by experienced engineers from Carl Zeiss, men who had spent their careers designing optical instruments. They had built rangefinders for naval guns, periscopes for submarines, gun sights for fighter aircraft. They understood precision optics better than almost anyone in the world. They began by constructing a complete working model of the Norden based on Lang's information and their own engineering analysis. This took months of painstaking work. Specialized components had to be fabricated to American specifications, which sometimes differed from German manufacturing standards. Tolerances had to be held to incredibly tight margins. The gyroscopes were particularly challenging. Norden had used certain bearing materials and lubricants that German engineers struggled to replicate exactly, but by late summer 1938, they had it. A functioning Norden Bombsight, built in Germany from stolen plans. It sat on a test bench in a secure laboratory, ready for evaluation. The tests began in September. Luftwaffe bombardiers flew training missions over test ranges in eastern Germany, using the reconstructed Norden to drop practice bombs on marked targets. The results were carefully measured and documented. Accuracy was assessed from various altitudes and airspeeds. Reliability under different conditions was evaluated. Ease of use for the bombardier was considered. The technical team compiled their findings into a detailed report, and alongside these flight tests, the engineers conducted a parallel evaluation. They compared the Norden point by point against Germany's own latest bombsight, the Carl Zeiss Lotfe 7, known as the Lotfe 7. The Lotfe 7 had been in development since the mid-1930s, completely independently of any knowledge about the Norden. German engineers had been working on the same fundamental problem American engineers were solving: how to accurately drop bombs from high-altitude aircraft flying at high speeds. They had arrived at similar solutions using similar principles. The Lotfe 7 used gyroscopic stabilization. It had an analog computer for trajectory calculations. It interfaced with the aircraft's autopilot. On paper, it looked remarkably similar to the Norden. But there were crucial differences. The Lotfe 7 was mechanically simpler, where the Norden consisted of two separate major components, a stabilizer platform and the sight head unit, each requiring individual maintenance and careful alignment. The Lotfe 7 integrated everything into a single compact metal housing. One box, one system. Easier to install, easier to maintain, easier to repair in the field. The Lotfe 7's optical system used a mirror tube arrangement that was elegantly simple. A tube extended down through the aircraft's fuselage, with a mirror at the bottom that reflected the target image up into a telescope in the main unit. The mechanism moved the mirror to stabilize the image and track the target. The Norden required the bombardier to locate a test target first, somewhere between the aircraft and the actual target, and use it to calibrate the system before switching to the real target. The Lotfe 7 could view and track the actual target directly from 90 degrees to 40 degrees in front of the aircraft. No calibration on an intermediate point, no switching between targets. Just aim at what you want to hit. The controls were different too. The Norden had numerous knobs, dials, and switches scattered across two separate units. Training bombardiers to use it effectively took weeks of intensive instruction. The Lotfe 7 had three large knurled knobs that could be differentiated by touch in the dark. Operations were more intuitive. Training time was shorter. When the comparison testing concluded in November 1938, the technical team submitted their report to the Luftwaffe High Command. The document ran to over 300 pages with detailed technical appendices. The summary, however, was concise. The Norden Bombsight was a remarkable achievement of American engineering. It demonstrated sophisticated design principles and impressive theoretical accuracy. Under ideal conditions, in test drops over known ranges with experienced bombardiers, it performed exceptionally well. But for Germany's purposes, for the Luftwaffe's tactical doctrine, for the reality of combat operations, the Lotfe 7 was superior. It was simpler to manufacture. Germany's industrial capacity was already stretched thin. Building the Norden would require retooling factories, creating new supply chains for specialized components, training workers on unfamiliar manufacturing processes. The Lotfe 7 was already in production. It was easier to maintain. In combat, damaged bombers often limped home with systems barely functioning. The Norden's two-unit design meant twice as many things that could break or fall out of alignment. The Lotfe 7's single-unit construction was more robust. It was faster to train bombardiers. The Luftwaffe needed to expand rapidly. Training bottlenecks were already a serious problem. Simpler equipment meant faster training, meant more operational crews sooner. And perhaps most importantly, it aligned better with German tactical bombing doctrine. The Luftwaffe was not pursuing American-style strategic bombing. Germany's Air Force was designed as tactical support for ground operations, close air support for advancing armies, surgical strikes on specific military targets. For these missions, the Lotfe 7's direct target viewing and simpler operation were actually advantages. The Americans were developing capabilities for mass formation bombing raids deep into enemy territory, waves of hundreds of aircraft attacking industrial complexes from high altitude. The Norden made sense for that mission. Germany was developing capabilities for precision strikes by smaller formations, attacking bridges, rail junctions, troop concentrations, supply depots. The Lotfe 7 made sense for that mission. The Luftwaffe accepted the recommendation. The Norden design was filed away as interesting reference material. Production of the Lotfe 7 continued and expanded. By 1941, when the Lotfe 7C model with full gyroscopic stabilization entered service, it had become the Luftwaffe's standard bombsight. It would remain so through the end of the war. And Hermann Lang? He continued working at the Norden factory through 1939, 1940, and into 1941, believing he had escaped detection. But the FBI had been building a case, a much larger case than Lang imagined. The Duquesne spy ring, named for its leader, Fritz Joubert Duquesne, was one of the largest German espionage operations ever conducted on American soil. 33 agents working across multiple cities, stealing military secrets, conducting sabotage, feeding intelligence back to Germany. Lang was just one member, but his theft of the Norden plans was the ring's greatest coup. The FBI had known about the ring since late 1939, but they waited, they watched, they documented. They wanted to capture the entire network in one sweep, not just arrest a few operatives and watch the rest disappear. They used a double agent, William Seybold, who pretended to work for the Germans while actually reporting everything to the FBI. Seybold met with ring members, including Lang. He wore concealed recording devices. The FBI filmed these meetings through hidden cameras. They were building an airtight case. The trap closed on June 29, 1941. Simultaneous raids across New York, New Jersey, and beyond. 33 arrests in a single morning. Hermann Lang was at work when FBI agents arrived. He did not resist. He did not seem surprised. Perhaps he had known, on some level, that this day would come. At his trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: photographs, audio recordings, testimony from Seybold and other witnesses, documents with Lang's handwriting, bank records showing the suspicious payments. There was no defense. The evidence was irrefutable. On December 13, 1941, just 2 days after Germany declared war on the United States, Lang was sentenced. 18 years in prison for espionage. A concurrent 2-year sentence for violating the Registration Act. The newspapers covered the trial extensively. The public was shocked to learn how easily German spies had penetrated American defenses. The story of the stolen Norden Bombsight became a symbol of vulnerability, a warning about the enemy within. But there was a bitter irony that most Americans never learned. By the time Lang went to prison, by the time the newspapers proclaimed the Norden plans had been stolen, by the time the public panicked about German spies, the Germans had already evaluated the Norden and chosen not to use it. The great secret weapon wasn't quite so secret. And the enemy who supposedly coveted it had actually decided their own design was better. The obsessive security around the Norden continued throughout the war, even though hundreds of Norden-equipped bombers were shot down over Germany in 1943 and 1944, even though German engineers had surely recovered intact or partially intact units from crash sites and examined them thoroughly. Even though the Luftwaffe clearly knew everything about how the Norden worked, American bombardiers still took the oath. Armed guards still escorted the bombsight to and from aircraft. Secure vaults still housed them between missions. Security classifications remained in place. The propaganda machinery continued promoting the Norden as America's ultimate secret weapon, a device of almost magical precision that would win the war. The reality was more complex and far less dramatic. Carl Norden himself was born in the Netherlands in 1880, not in America. He emigrated to the United States in 1904 after completing engineering studies in Switzerland. He was 34 years old, already educated and experienced, seeking better opportunities in the dynamic American economy. His timing was excellent. America was in the midst of rapid technological expansion. New industries were emerging. Electrical power was transforming manufacturing. Internal combustion engines were revolutionizing transportation. It was an era when a clever engineer with good ideas could build a fortune. Norden went to work for Sperry Gyroscope Corporation in 1911. Sperry was pioneering gyroscopic stabilization systems for ships, trying to reduce the rolling motion that affected accuracy of naval gunfire. Norden contributed to these efforts and learned the intricate physics of gyroscopes, how they maintained orientation in space, how they could detect and measure motion, how they could be harnessed to control mechanical systems. After World War I, Norden left Sperry and established his own consulting practice. He worked directly for the United States Navy on various projects. One assignment involved a catapult system for launching a proposed flying bomb, an early cruise missile concept that was never fully developed. But this work brought Norden into contact with Navy aviators and bombing specialists who were wrestling with a fundamental problem. How do you accurately hit a target from an aircraft moving at high speed and high altitude? The mathematics were daunting. A bomb released from 20,000 feet takes roughly 30 seconds to reach the ground, not falling straight down but following a curved trajectory. During those 30 seconds, the aircraft travels nearly 2 miles forward at typical bomber speeds. Wind pushes the bomb laterally, air resistance slows it, altitude affects, air density which affects fall rate, temperature matters, bomb weight and shape matter, everything matters. And all these variables are changing constantly throughout the flight. Early bomb sights required the bombardier to make complex manual calculations before each drop, estimating all the variables, setting the bomb sight accordingly, hoping everything was correct. It was slow, inaccurate, and required highly skilled operators. Norden envisioned something revolutionary, an automatic system that would measure all the variables in real time, calculate the trajectory continuously, and drop the bomb at exactly the right moment. Not just a better bomb sight, a complete bombing system that removed human error from the equation. He began development work in the early 1920s under Navy contract. The first prototypes were crude, but they demonstrated the concept was viable. By 1929, he had refined the design enough that the Navy designated it the Mark 15 and placed an initial order. Full production began in 1931. The device consisted of two main components working together. The stabilizer provided a gyroscopically leveled platform that remained horizontal, regardless of the aircraft's attitude. If the plane banked into a turn, the stabilizer stayed level. If the plane pitched up or down, the stabilizer compensated. This gave the bomb sight a stable reference frame for all its calculations. The sighthead unit contained the optics and the analog computer. The bombardier looked through a telescope at the target far below. A complex array of gears, bearings, and mechanical linkages calculated bomb trajectory based on inputs. Altitude, measured by barometric sensors. Airspeed, measured by pitot tubes. Wind drift, measured by tracking a reference point on the ground and calculating how fast the aircraft was being pushed laterally. Trail, the angle behind the vertical at which the bomb must be released to hit the target, calculated, automatically based on all the other variables. And, crucially, the Norden interfaced with the bomber's autopilot. During the bomb run, the final approach to the target, the bombardier would engage the system. The bomb sight would actually fly the aircraft, making continuous small adjustments to keep the plane exactly on course, compensating for wind gusts and turbulence, maintaining precise altitude and airspeed. When all the variables aligned, when the calculated trajectory matched the actual geometry, the Norden would automatically release the bombs. In testing under ideal conditions, the results were astonishing. Drops from 20,000 feet landing within 75 feet of the target. Circular error probable, the radius within which 50% of bombs would fall, measured at 75 feet. This was unprecedented accuracy for high-altitude bombing. Nothing else in the world came close. The Navy was thrilled. The Army Air Corps, initially skeptical, became enthusiastic when they saw the test results. Both services poured money into production. By the late 1930s, Norden's company was producing hundreds of units per month and expanding capacity rapidly. The cost per unit was high, roughly $8,000, the equivalent of a small house in many parts of America. But if it delivered the promised accuracy, it was worth it. The entire American doctrine for strategic bombing rested on a fundamental assumption. Precision attacks on critical targets would cripple an enemy's ability to wage war without the indiscriminate destruction of area bombing. You did not need to level entire cities if you could surgically remove specific factories, power plants, oil refineries, transportation hubs. High-altitude precision bombing would be more humane, more efficient, and ultimately more effective than the carpet bombing the British were pursuing. But this doctrine required being able to hit specific targets from high altitude. It required the Norden, or something like it. Without that technological capability, the entire strategic concept collapsed. This explains the obsessive secrecy. The Norden was not just a piece of equipment. It was the keystone of America's air war strategy. If it failed, if it did not perform as promised, the entire approach would have to be reconsidered. If the enemy obtained it and developed countermeasures or their own equivalent, the American advantage would disappear. So the security protocols grew increasingly elaborate. Bombardiers were required to take a formal oath during training. I swear to protect the Norden Bombsight with my life, if necessary. I will never allow it to fall into enemy hands. I understand that unauthorized disclosure of its secrets could endanger the national security of the United States. The oath was purely ceremonial with no legal force, but it impressed upon young bombardiers the seriousness of their responsibility. Armed guards escorted the bombsight to and from aircraft, before and after every mission. Two armed men, usually military police with loaded weapons, walked alongside the bombardier as he carried the device across the tarmac. Storage facilities were elaborate. Glasgow Army Airfield in Montana had a dedicated Norden Bombsight vault, a reinforced concrete structure with steel doors and round-the-clock guards. Similar vaults existed at training bases and operational airfields across the country. Between missions, the bombsights were secured in climate-controlled, dust-proof rooms. Technical manuals were classified. Training materials were classified. Even diagrams showing where the bombsight was installed in the aircraft were classified. Photographers were forbidden from taking pictures of bomber nose sections that might reveal details of the installation. Regulations specified exactly how to destroy the bombsight in an emergency. The official procedure required 2 rounds from a .45 caliber pistol fired into the rate end mechanism, plus 1 round through the telescope. Some units allegedly had thermite incendiary devices, 18-inch steel cylinders packed with 15 pounds of magnesium and oxidizer, designed to melt the bombsight into slag if capture appeared imminent. Whether these devices were actually deployed or just planned is unclear. Triggering one accidentally in flight would likely destroy the entire aircraft. The security circus reached absurd proportions at times. Some overzealous commanders required bombardiers to cover the bombsight with a canvas shroud, even when walking across a secure military base. Others demanded that it be disassembled into components that were stored separately, requiring reassembly before each flight. The effort consumed thousands of man-hours and created logistical nightmares. And all the while, since at least January 1938, when Hermann Lang handed off that umbrella full of blueprints, the Germans had possessed detailed knowledge of the Norden's design and principles. By 1941, when security was at its peak, Luftwaffe engineers had spent 3 years studying the stolen plans, building models, conducting tests, and ultimately deciding their own bomb site was better suited to their needs. The Great Secret was not secret at all. American intelligence agencies learned the truth after the war, when they interrogated captured Luftwaffe personnel and examined German records. The shock was considerable. All that effort, all that security, all those procedures and protocols and armed guards and vaults and oaths. And the enemy had known everything since before the war even started. Some historians have argued the entire Norden security apparatus was actually a successful intelligence operation in itself, a gigantic deception to make the Germans think they had stolen something more valuable than it actually was, thereby wasting their resources on evaluating and attempting to copy a system that didn't align with their tactical needs. This theory gives credit for strategic thinking that probably did not exist. The security was real, driven by genuine concern that American technological advantages might be lost. The fact that it became counterproductive theatre was accident, not design. Others suggest the obsessive secrecy served a domestic purpose, boosting public confidence that America possessed superior weapons and scientific capabilities that would ensure victory. The Norden became a symbol, tangible proof that American ingenuity would overcome the enemy. The mythology was useful even if the reality was more prosaic. Both explanations contain truth, but the simpler explanation is that military bureaucracies develop security protocols based on worst-case assumptions, and then resist changing those protocols even when circumstances change. Once the Norden was classified as a critical secret, the machinery of classification and protection engaged, and could not easily be disengaged, even when the secret was clearly compromised. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Now, what about the Norden's actual combat performance? Did it live up to its promise? The answer is complicated and somewhat disappointing. Under ideal conditions, on clear days with excellent visibility, against stationary targets with no enemy opposition, experienced bombardiers could achieve remarkable accuracy with the Norden. In training drops over known ranges in the American Southwest, where the weather was usually perfect and nobody was shooting back, accuracy was consistently good. But combat in Europe was nothing like training ranges in Arizona. Weather over northern Europe was notoriously bad. Heavy cloud cover was normal. Thunderstorms were frequent. Fog-shrouded targets. Ice formed on aircraft windscreens and bombsight optics. The Norden required visual identification of the target. If you could not see the grid target, the sophisticated calculations were useless. You were back to blind dropping, estimating position based on radio navigation aids and dead reckoning, hoping your bombs fell somewhere near the target. Enemy defenses created immense problems. German fighter aircraft attacked bomber formations throughout the bomb run. Flak bursts exploded around the bombers in dense black clouds. Shrapnel tore through fuselages. Aircraft shook from nearby explosions. The Norden required the bomber to fly straight and level on a precise course for several minutes during the final approach. This was the exact opposite of evasive maneuvering. Staying on course made the aircraft an easy target for anti-aircraft gunners below, who could predict exactly where the bomber would be in 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Pilots hated it. Crews knew the bomb run was when they were most vulnerable, when casualties were highest, when the odds turned against them. The psychological pressure was enormous. The Norden's autopilot mode disconnected the pilot's controls. The bombardier was flying the aircraft through those terrifying final minutes. Young men, barely out of their teens, trying to keep their hands steady on the controls, while flak exploded around them, and fighters made firing passes, and the aircraft shuddered from hits. Under these conditions, accuracy suffered dramatically. Studies conducted during the war revealed uncomfortable truths about the Norden's actual performance. In 1943, analysis of 8th Air Force bombing results over Germany showed that only about 5% of bombs fell within 1,000 feet of the target. 1,000 feet. Not the 75-foot CEP achieved in testing, not even remotely close. The average circular error was about 1,200 feet, just over a quarter of a mile. This meant that half of all bombs dropped fell more than 1,200 feet from the aiming point. At that dispersion, you could not hit a specific building. You could barely hit a specific factory complex. Precision bombing, the entire doctrinal foundation of American air strategy, was not working as planned. The problem was not primarily the Norden. The device functioned as designed. The problem was the difference between sterile test conditions and chaotic combat reality. The problem was human factors, exhausted crews, inexperienced bombardiers, fear and stress and confusion. The problem was weather and enemy action, and the simple fact that war is messy and unpredictable. The Army Air Forces gradually adapted their tactics. They abandoned the idea of individual aircraft, each selecting and attacking their own targets. That required too much skill and created too much variability. Instead, they developed lead bomber procedures. One highly experienced bombardier in a lead aircraft would sight and drop first. All other bombers in the formation would drop their bombs when they saw the lead's bombs release, maintaining tight formation. This created a pattern of impacts around the lead's aim point. If the lead was accurate, the entire formation's bombs fell in a relatively concentrated area. If the lead was off target, everyone was off target. But at least the pattern was consistent and predictable. Later in the war, particularly for missions against large area targets like cities, the Air Forces essentially adopted area bombing techniques, despite the early rhetoric about precision. Large formations would saturate an entire district with bombs. Yes, specific buildings might survive, but the overall damage to industrial capacity, transportation infrastructure, and worker housing achieved the strategic goal of degrading the enemy's ability to produce weapons. Was the Norden a failure? That is too harsh. It was a technological achievement that pushed the boundaries of what mechanical computers could accomplish. Under good conditions, it performed well. It gave American bombers a capability that was at least equivalent to what other nations possessed and possibly slightly better. But it was not the war-winning wonder weapon that propaganda suggested. It did not make precision bombing routine or reliable. It did not eliminate the need for large formations and saturation tactics. It did not change the fundamental nature of strategic bombing, which remained crude and destructive despite the sophisticated technology employed. Germany's decision not to adopt the stolen Norden design was, in retrospect, completely logical. The Lotfe 7 was genuinely simpler and more practical for their purposes. Moreover, by 1942 and 1943, German strategic bombing capability was declining rapidly anyway. The Luftwaffe was losing aircraft faster than factories could replace them. Experienced crews were dying, and training new crews took time Germany did not have. Whether German bombers used the Norden or the Lotfe 7 or any other bombsight became increasingly irrelevant as the Luftwaffe shifted to defensive operations, trying desperately to stop Allied bombers rather than conducting their own strategic attacks. The Japanese captured Norden bombsights from downed American aircraft in the Pacific. They studied them carefully, and even attempted to produce a simplified copy designated the Type 4 automatic bombing sight. But they found it too complex to manufacture in quantity with their industrial capacity. Production numbers were minimal, and the Type 4 never became standard equipment. Japan's bombing doctrine, like Germany's, did not emphasize the kind of high-altitude precision attacks the Norden was designed for. By the time Hermann Lang was released from prison in September 1950, the world had changed beyond recognition. The war was over. Germany was divided and occupied. The atomic bomb had rendered debates about conventional bombsight accuracy almost quaint. Precision now meant nuclear weapons that obliterated entire cities regardless of where exactly they fell. Lang was deported to Germany immediately upon release. He settled in West Germany and lived quietly until his death. He never publicly discussed his espionage activities. There were no memoirs, no interviews, no attempts to justify or explain his actions. He simply disappeared into obscurity, another footnote in the vast history of World War II intelligence operations. The Norden Bombsight itself continued in service for decades after the war. The United States Air Force used it during the Korean War, though with mixed results in that conflict as well. As late as 1967, Navy patrol squadrons employed Norden bombsights to drop sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War. Finally, with the development of laser-guided bombs and other precision-guided munitions in the 1970s, the Norden became obsolete. Modern smart weapons achieved the precision the Norden had promised but never quite delivered, using entirely different technology, electronics and guidance systems that Carl Norden could never have imagined when he designed his mechanical computer in the 1920s. Today, surviving Norden bombsights are museum pieces. The Smithsonian has several. The National Museum of the United States Air Force displays them prominently. Aviation museums across the country feature Norden bombsights as examples of World War II technology. Visitors look at the complex assemblage of gears and gyroscopes and lenses, trying to imagine young bombardiers using these devices while surrounded by explosions and enemy fire. The devices look almost steampunk now, mechanical computers built with 1930s technology, elegant in their precision but primitive compared to a modern smartphone's computing power. The story of the Norden bombsight is not really about technology. It is about the gap between promise and performance, between theoretical capability and practical results, between what we hope our tools will do and what they actually accomplish in the chaos of real use. It is about security theatre, the illusion of secrecy maintained long after the secret has been compromised. It is about how different military forces made different design choices based on different tactical doctrines, and how both choices could be rational even when they were completely different. It is about espionage and loyalty, and the choices immigrants make when torn between their adopted country and their homeland. Hermann Lang believed he was serving Germany. Perhaps he was. The intelligence he provided helped German engineers understand American capabilities. But Germany chose not to copy what Lang had stolen. They had their own solution to the same problem, and for their purposes, their solution worked better. The great secret weapon was not as secret as America believed, not as revolutionary as propaganda claimed, and not as essential to victory as doctrine suggested. Wars are not won by single weapons or devices. They are won by industrial capacity, by logistics, by the courage of millions of individuals, by leadership and strategy, and occasionally by sheer luck. The Norden bombsight was one piece of a vast puzzle, neither as important as its advocates claimed, nor as useless as its critics sometimes suggest. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The final chapter of the Norden bombsight story extends beyond its physical obsolescence and into the realm of military legend and technological philosophy. The irony that Germany, after successfully stealing America's most guarded secret, opted not to use it, became a crucial, unpublicized lesson for post-war American intelligence and defense planners. It demonstrated that superior technology, even when genuinely secret, is not a silver bullet. The true value of a weapon system lies not just in its theoretical precision, but in its alignment with doctrine, industrial capacity, and the human element in combat. After World War II, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, USSBS, meticulously analyzed the air war, including the performance of the Norden. The data confirmed the high-altitude precision bombing doctrine had failed its central test in Europe. While the Norden was an engineering marvel, the real-world operational challenges weather, anti-aircraft fire, fighter defense, and crew fatigue rendered its theoretical accuracy moot. This realization fundamentally influenced the development of the next generation of American bombing systems. Engineers shifted their focus from purely mechanical or optical solutions to systems that used radar and electronics for all-weather bombing. The APQ-7 Eagle radar system, developed late in World War II and used post-war, allowed bombardiers to see large ground targets through heavy cloud cover. This was an acknowledgement that the weather, not the bomb sights, calculation engine was the primary limiting factor in the air war. In many ways, the enduring story of the Norden Bombsight is a cautionary tale about technological hubris. The belief that a single, sophisticated machine could eliminate human fallibility and the chaos of war was a classic American tendency. The vast security apparatus surrounding the Norden, the armed guards, the vaults, the ceremonial oath was, in retrospect, less about protecting a piece of hardware and more about maintaining the national morale and the internal faith in the doctrine it supported. The propaganda machine built a legend around the device that far outpaced its reality, and the military felt compelled to maintain the pretense of that legend. The fact that the Lotfe 7, the German alternative, was simpler, easier to manufacture, and proved more robust in the field, speaks to a different philosophy of military technology, one that prioritized practicality and battlefield reliability over raw, theoretical performance. Hermann Lang, the engineer who risked everything, remains a poignant figure. His deportation in 1950 marked the true end of his involvement in the saga. He was not a greedy professional spy. He was an ideological traitor, driven by a misplaced sense of German patriotism. His actions, though a remarkable espionage success for the Abwehr, ultimately had no strategic impact on the outcome of the war. The stolen secret was an expensive distraction for the Germans, who ultimately validated their own indigenous design. Lang's 18-year sentence was a clear message about treason, but the intelligence he risked his life for had already been dismissed as strategically less valuable than the existing German technology. He lived out his remaining years in West Germany, an unheralded figure whose moment of profound consequence had been ironically neutralized by the very engineers who received his blueprints. The Norden Bombsight, the Aces High device that promised to make war obsolete by making it precise, instead became an artifact, a brass and aluminum monument to a failed promise, a lesson in the complex relationship between man, machine, and the battlefield.